For a moment, imagine a narrow mountain pass where the sun scorches rock and steel, where every step forward costs blood, and where two empires collide in a place few had ever heard of. Yet the fate of an entire campaign hangs in the balance. This is not Europe, not the deserts of North Africa, but the brutal highlands of Eritrea, where courage, endurance, and sacrifice would define one of the most forgotten battles of World War II. Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today we step into the dramatic and often overlooked story of the Battle of Keren, a decisive clash of the East African campaign that turned mountains into fortresses and valleys into graves, shaping the course of the war on an entire continent. The story of Keren begins with ambition and empire. In the late 1930s, fascist Italy under Benito Mussolini sought to carve out a new Roman Empire in Africa. Italy already controlled Eritrea and Italian Somaliland, and after conquering Ethiopia in 1936, it linked these territories into Italian East Africa. On paper, this colonial empire looked impressive, but in reality it was isolated, poorly supplied, and vulnerable to attack. When Italy entered World War II in June 1940, British forces in Sudan, Kenya, and Aden suddenly faced a hostile power on their doorstep. At first, the Italians advanced, capturing British Somaliland and threatening Sudan and Kenya. Yet their success masked deep weaknesses, especially once the Royal Navy cut supply routes through the Red Sea. By early 1941, the balance had begun to shift. British and Commonwealth forces, joined by African troops and Ethiopian resistance fighters, launched a counteroffensive to dismantle Italian East Africa. One of the key objectives was the port of Massawa on the Red Sea, Italy's most important naval base in the region. To reach it, the British had to break through Eritrea's mountainous interior, and standing directly in their path was the town of Keren. More than a town, Keren was a natural fortress. It sat in a bowl of rugged mountains, controlling the only viable road and railway linking the Eritrean highlands to the coast. Whoever held Keren controlled the gateway to Massawa. The Italian command understood this perfectly. After withdrawing from the Sudanese border, Italian forces chose Keren as the place to make their stand. They fortified the surrounding peaks with trenches, bunkers, artillery positions, and machine gun nests carved directly into rock. Mountains like Mount Sanchel, Mount Samana, and the forbidding Dongolaas Gorge became names that would haunt attacking troops. The Italians included regular army units, colonial troops known as askari, and elite formations, all determined to hold the line. For them, Keren was not just a defensive position, it was the last chance to delay the British advance and protect Massawa. The attacking force was a diverse army drawn from across the British Empire. Indian divisions formed the backbone of the assault, supported by British artillery, engineers, and armored units where terrain allowed. There were also Sudanese, West African, and other African troops, along with logistical support stretching back hundreds of miles. The terrain, however, was the greatest enemy of all. Steep slopes, narrow paths, and sheer cliffs made movement painfully slow. Supplies had to be carried by mule or man. Tanks were almost useless, and artillery had to be hauled into position under constant fire. The battle opened in early February 1941, and from the first assaults it was clear that this would be no quick victory. Initial attacks against the mountain positions met fierce resistance. Italian gunners, while concealed and commanding excellent fields of fire, inflicted heavy casualties. Every ridge taken by the attackers was swept by fire from another height. The British and Indian troops fought their way up slopes under blistering heat by day and bitter cold by night, often engaging in close combat among rocks and trenches. Progress was measured in yards, not miles. One of the most formidable obstacles was the Dongolaas Gorge, a narrow defile through which the road to Massawa passed. Italian artillery dominated the gorge, turning it into a killing zone. Repeated attempts to force a passage were repulsed, leaving wrecked vehicles and fallen soldiers scattered along the road. Engineers worked under fire to clear mines and repair damage, only to see their efforts undone by fresh bombardments. The sense of frustration among the attackers grew, but so did their determination. They knew that Keren was the key, and failure was not an option. As February dragged on, the battle settled into a grim pattern. Attacks, counterattacks, and artillery duels echoed through the mountains. The Italians fought with skill and stubbornness, fully aware that retreat would open the road to the sea. For many Italian soldiers, this was a matter of honor as much as strategy. Cut off from reinforcements and increasingly short of supplies, They nonetheless held their positions with remarkable tenacity. On the British side, commanders struggled to adapt tactics to the unforgiving terrain, learning through hard experience that frontal assaults were costly and often futile. Yet despite the stalemate, the pressure on the Italian defenders was relentless. British artillery slowly improved its positions, bringing more guns to bear on the mountain strongpoints. Air support harassed Italian supply lines and positions, though the mountains limited its effectiveness. Every day the attackers probed for weaknesses, seeking a way to break the deadlock. The Battle of Keren was becoming not just a test of firepower, but a test of endurance, morale, and will, setting the stage for an even more desperate struggle to come. As the battle entered March 1941, exhaustion weighed heavily on both sides, but neither could afford to yield. For the British and Commonwealth forces, time was critical. Every delay allowed the Italians to strengthen their defenses and threatened the broader timetable of the East African campaign. For the Italian defenders, each day held at Keren was a small victory, proof that they could still challenge the British Empire, even while isolated from the rest of the Axis war effort. The mountains bore silent witness as the struggle intensified. Commanders on the attacking side began to rethink their approach. Rather than focusing solely on the road through the Dongolaas Gorge, they planned a series of coordinated assaults aimed at capturing the dominating heights. If the peaks could be taken, Italian artillery would be neutralized, and the road would finally open. This strategy placed enormous responsibility on infantry units, particularly the Indian brigades tasked with scaling near, vertical slopes under fire. Preparation was meticulous, but nothing could fully prepare the soldiers for what awaited them. One of the fiercest struggles centered on Mount Sanchel and its neighboring features. These rocky heights formed the core of the Italian defensive line. Attacks often began at night, with troops climbing silently toward enemy positions, only to be met by flares, machine gun fire, and grenades. The fighting was brutal and intimate, sometimes devolving into hand-to-hand combat among boulders and trenches. Positions changed hands multiple times, with neither side able to secure a decisive advantage. Casualties mounted, and the slopes became littered with the fallen. Italian counterattacks were swift and determined. Using their knowledge of the terrain, Italian and Ascari troops struck back at newly captured positions, often under cover of darkness. These counterblows forced the attackers into desperate defensive actions, clinging to exposed ridges while under fire from multiple directions. The courage displayed by soldiers on both sides was extraordinary, and accounts from the battle speak of acts of heroism amid appalling conditions. Water was scarce, medical evacuation was difficult, and the wounded sometimes lay for hours before help could reach them. Artillery played an increasingly important role as the battle wore on. British gunners, working from precarious positions, delivered concentrated barrages against Italian strongpoints. The thunder of guns echoed through the mountains, sending clouds of dust and rock into the air. For the Italians, ammunition shortages began to bite, limiting their ability to respond with equal intensity. Even so, their defensive fire remained deadly, exploiting every fold of the terrain. The battle became a grinding contest, each side pushing its men to the limits of human endurance. Beyond the immediate fighting, the broader context of the East African campaign was beginning to shift. British advances elsewhere in Ethiopia and Somaliland were tightening the noose around Italian East Africa. News of setbacks filtered through to the defenders at Keren, undermining morale even as they continued to fight with determination. For the attackers, the knowledge that victory here would hasten the collapse of Italian power in the region provided a powerful incentive to press on, no matter the cost. By mid-March, the cumulative pressure began to tell. After weeks of failed attempts, a series of coordinated assaults finally achieved a breakthrough on key heights. Indian units, supported by artillery and engineers, managed to secure positions that dominated the Italian line. These gains were hard, won and fiercely contested, but for the first time, the attackers held ground that the Italians could not easily retake. The fall of these positions marked a turning point, signaling that the defensive ring around Keren was beginning to crack. With the high ground increasingly threatened, Italian commanders faced an impossible choice. To continue fighting risked encirclement and destruction, but withdrawal meant conceding the gateway to Massawa. They chose to fight on, launching further counterattacks in a desperate bid to restore their line. These efforts, though courageous, lacked the strength and coordination needed to reverse the situation. The defenders were running out of men, ammunition, and hope, while the attackers, though battered, sensed that victory was finally within reach. The final days of the battle were marked by relentless pressure. British and Commonwealth forces tightened their grip, pushing closer to the heart of the Italian defenses. The Dongolaas Gorge, once a symbol of frustration and loss, came under increasing threat as Italian guns were silenced or overrun. The road to the Red Sea, blocked for so long by blood and steel, was at last beginning to open. The Battle of Keren was nearing its climax, and its outcome would resonate far beyond the mountains of Eritrea. In the closing phase of the Battle of Keren, the sense of inevitability grew stronger with each passing day. Italian positions, once formidable, were now under constant attack from above and below. Supply lines were disrupted, communications faltered, and the defenders found themselves increasingly isolated on their rocky strongholds. Yet even in these final moments, resistance did not simply collapse. Small groups of Italian and Askari soldiers continued to fight with determination, defending trenches and bunkers until they were overwhelmed or forced to withdraw. The decisive moment came in late March 1941, when coordinated assaults finally broke the remaining Italian grip on the heights, overlooking the Dongolaas Gorge. With artillery positions lost and infantry exhausted, the defenders could no longer hold the road. Under cover of darkness, Italian forces began a fighting withdrawal toward Asmara and Massawa. It was a disciplined retreat, but it marked the end of the stand at Keren. The British and Commonwealth troops, battered and wary, moved cautiously forward, aware that the battle had cost them dearly but had delivered a crucial victory. The road to Massawa now lay open. Within days, British forces advanced toward the coast, and on April 8, 1941, Massawa fell. With it went Italy's last major base on the Red Sea, effectively ending organized Italian resistance in Eritrea. The fall of Keren thus proved to be the turning point of the East African campaign. Without this victory, the capture of Massawa and the eventual collapse of Italian East Africa would have been far more difficult and costly. The human cost of the Battle of Keren was immense. Casualties on both sides were heavy, reflecting the intensity and duration of the fighting. Thousands were killed or wounded, many in assaults that gained only a few hundred yards of ground. The rugged terrain magnified every loss, making recovery of the wounded and burial of the dead a harrowing task. Today, war cemeteries near Keren stand as silent reminders of the price paid by soldiers from many nations, united by circumstance in a remote corner of the world. Beyond its immediate military significance, the battle had lasting implications. It demonstrated the vulnerability of Italy's African empire, once cut off from reinforcement, and highlighted the importance of logistics, terrain, and morale in modern warfare. For the British Empire, it was a hard-earned success that showcased the contribution of Indian and African troops, whose bravery and sacrifice were essential to victory. For Italy, it was a sobering defeat that underscored the limits of imperial ambition in the face of sustained opposition. The Battle of Keren also occupies a unique place in the memory of World War II. Overshadowed by larger battles in Europe and North Africa, it is often forgotten despite its strategic importance and dramatic nature. Yet for those who fought there, it was an experience etched forever into memory, a struggle defined by heat, rock, and relentless combat. The mountains of Eritrea, indifferent to human conflict, absorbed the echoes of battle and then returned to silence, guarding their history in stone. In the broader sweep of the war, Keren reminds us that World War II was truly global, fought not only in famous cities and beaches but also in remote valleys and mountain passes. Victory in such places depended not on grand maneuvers alone, but on the endurance of ordinary soldiers facing extraordinary challenges. Their stories deserve to be remembered, not as footnotes, but as integral chapters in the history of the conflict. As we look back on the Battle of Keren, we see more than a clash of armies. We see a testament to human resilience, to the cost of empire, and to the way geography can shape destiny. In the narrow passes and towering peaks of Eritrea, the course of the East African campaign was decided, and with it, the fate of an empire faded into history. This is why the Battle of Keren matters, and why its story continues to echo, quietly but powerfully, through the mountains where it was fought.